everyone, I'm Tamar Braces. I'm the editor of Tomatoes for Neela, the debut children's picture book by Padma Lakshmi, illustrated by Juana Martinez-Neal. And I'm so excited that Padma Lakshmi is joining us today for this live signing event. So without further ado, hello, Padma.
Hi, everybody. Hi, Tamar.
So great to be here. And it's been such an exciting week with the book going on sale. I was wondering if there have been any highlights for you so far.
You know, I was happy that we were able to do one in-person event. We did it, at the farmers market earlier this last week. And when did we do it? Did we do it Monday? I can't even remember.
Friday.
Okay, good. Yeah, there was a weekend in there. Okay, so, and it was really nice just to see people. And it seemed very fitting because, part of the story does take place in our local farmers market. So I was happy to do it there. We've had so many beautiful memories of, Krishna and I buying food or tasting things. And that's also, I hope, infused in the book. So it felt fitting. That was really nice. Other than that, it's been also just people giving me feedback. Like I got emails from, an aunt who lives in New Jersey, who her daughter had read it to her child and just had commented. So random, it's always nice to hear like specific comments from people who just bought the book and happened to be reading it with their kid. Another person said that their daughter was only 20 months, but kept reaching for the book to have it read to her again. So even so, she's, even though she's so little, she apparently enjoyed enough to know to ask for it by, pointing to the book, stuff like that, pictures of kids who reading it. Put a couple on my IG stories. This part of it is really the fun part. I hope it does well. I hope it gets reviewed critically. I hope librarians and parents like it. But to see the actual child's reaction is something that I don't really get. We get it on Top Chef, but I don't really get it with my other books. So it's nice.
Yeah, I mean, as someone who was there, it was so great to see kids in line getting their books signed and you interacting with the kids directly and seeing them walk away with the books. Were there any surprises when you were signing books for fans?
No, these two young women came up and said that they became friends over Top Chef. I think they started watching it in pandemic. I put them up on my IG stories briefly, but they were just saying how they bonded over watching that show and they became really good friends. And, now they're best friends and they even moved in together. And so, for them to come to the signing, even though they're not kids, they're going to buy this book because, in a way, I bond them. And so that was cool. It was nice. It was just like a nice lark thing,
And it's proof that food is the greatest connector.
There you go. Yeah.
Well, it's so great to be with you here today and with readers across the country. We'll be talking about the book, and then Padma will be answering questions submitted by you, the viewers. I'm just going to get us started off with one of my own, which is that Tomatoes for Neela is a beautiful story about a mother, a daughter, and a grandmother and their shared love of cooking. Can you talk a little bit about the importance of this circle of women in your own life and how you pass down recipes and share them together?
Sure. So I was raised shuttling between my grandmother's house in India and my mom's house during the school year when I was growing up here in America, mostly in New York, but then also in Los Angeles. And, in India, we also lived as a joint family. So my uncle, my mother's brother and his wife and their kids lived also with my grandparents. So we all grew up together. So my cousins are like my siblings. And my aunt also has a lot to contribute to my cooking and my understanding of food, and therefore also to life. And, because I spent more time in the kitchen, either with my mother or with these other women in India than I did anyone anywhere, maybe school. But other than that, it was a kind of school. And I think what our family did inadvertently or on purpose or whatever over the years, I feel, I guess I should talk to my other cousins and see how they feel, but is that through teaching me how to cook, they also taught me about life. They would talk a lot in metaphors. Now that I'm thinking about it, I never really thought much that. I thought they were just making an example, but it's quite poetic. And, my grandmother would say things like, in cooking, when you're making a stew or, you know, a curry or whatever, just like life, everything has its proper time, you know, and she told me that, and I'll never forget that. So she said, don't add the potatoes last because they take time to cook, you know, and add the green stuff last because, you know, that green evaporates. It's the same thing, you know, in life, like don't want everything right away, or plan, because if you don't plan now, it's not going to be ready for you when you need it later. And I think we passed information, or they passed it to us, you know, generation to generation through cooking, because cooking was women's work, is women's work. And so it's where all the decisions were made, all the um, gossip was exchanged, you know,
All the important stuff.
everything. Yeah, and you wanted to be a part of it. So to me, cooking held a lot of power and magic and wisdom.
Well, that's a good lead into our first fan question, which comes from Stacy in Knoxville, Tennessee. And Stacy says, "Hi, Padma, such a big fan. I want to know
Hi.
what inspired you to author this children's book."
Oh my gosh, it was always a dream of mine. And it just, I used to tell this story to my daughter Krishna, who's now 11, because she came home wanting pomegranates in the summer. And I said, this is not the time for pomegranates, it's time for tomatoes. And we would always go to the green market, as I said. So, you know, it was just showing her all the tomatoes. And did you notice how now there's so many of them? It's, you know, just to make her awake a little bit, because she's not familiar with the seasons. And we just started with tomatoes because I'd always give her tomatoes to cut with a little serrated butternut, just to give her something to do when I was testing recipes. You know, I'm a single mom. And so, like, for me, I want to spend time with my kid, but I've got stuff to do. So, and in those early years, she wasn't even in school all day. So just plonk her on top of my, you know, kitchen counter. So we started that way. And I just embellished the story over the years. And then I met Tamar, and I did always want to do a children's book, but it, you know, I looked into it a little bit, but didn't come to fruition. And so I showed her the story, and then, you know, she made some edits and suggestions, all of which were very astute in my opinion. And that's how really the book came about. I obviously, having been in food for 20 years, I have a lot of fully formed thoughts about food. And as a parent, I also have a lot of thoughts about children and food, and it's such a big part of my life. And so I needed some place to put those, you know, all that information and all those opinions and stuff. And so it's nice to be able to have the book. It's nice to be able to have that creative outlet through a very simple, you know, barely narrative structure. I mean, nothing happens in the book, they just make sauce, you know. But I wanted it to be something that was a conversation starter. I wanted to talk about, you know, farm workers. I wanted to show history. I always think, you know, honestly, Tomatoes for Neela is just in fiction form for children what Taste the Nation is in another way. Like, you get a little bit of history, you get a little bit of my, you know, opinion about the world, whether it's paying attention to farm workers or giving credit where credit is due about, you know, where things come from and all that. And also showing a diversity of foods, showing a diversity of cuisines and languages, because that's what real life is like. You know, just like in real life, there are families where 3 people have different complexions. You know, it's true in my family, so it's true in Tomatoes for Neela. And so I had all these things that I wanted to do, and I was telling this story to Krishna anyway. So it feels really sweet to be able to have this beautiful representation of it, you know, especially with Juana, Juana's illustrations, excuse me. We were lucky enough to nab the Caldecott Honor recipient, Juana Martinez-Neal, who did such a beautiful job. And I just love how cozy and warm the pictures are. I'm looking at the book, which is over here. I
You
have a
two are a
pen.
dream team.
So, you know, it feels really sweet. That's how really the book came about. So, Stacy, would you like me to sign a book plate for you? And do you spell your name with an E?
With an EY, correct?
Yeah, so that's what I do.
Sure.
Okay, this is my
But
first.
otherwise, you can just be signing your name as you go along on the book plates.
Oh,
And we'll
okay,
make
great.
sure that everyone who ordered a book will get a signed book plate. And just a note there that signed book plates are available at premiercollectibles.com/Neela. Well, Padma, you said not much happens in the book, and so I will disagree with that, because while there's not maybe a traditional conflict resolution, I feel like there's such a great arc in the story. There's both the arc of mother and daughter going to the market, buying their tomatoes, and the arc of like what what their journey is together, with the story of with their grandma in India, their Paati, but then also the journey of the actual tomato from where it was grown, the farmers who picked it, who brought it to the market, and then how the dish not only ends up on their table, but also gets canned for later. So we see that the tomato actually has quite a journey of its own.
I think it's cool the way it is. Somebody said that to me. They were like, and nothing really happened. I'm like, wait a minute.
Well, our next question comes from Kobe from White Plains, New York. And the question is, what were some of your favorite dishes growing up? Were you always cooking with relatives, or did your passion for food come later?
I was always cooking with relatives. I was cooking very early by myself. I was a latchkey kid here in New York City. And first things I started doing by myself, I would doctor up Campbell's soup. And also I was a vegetarian. So my mom would buy cream of potato, cream of mushroom, which I didn't really like till later, and also vegetarian vegetable. She would take bags with cans of this stuff to my babysitter's house, and I would go there for lunch, and I would go there after school. And then I started doing it myself, and I would put thyme or oregano in there. I would chop up jalapenos because I was a kid, but my palate obviously was an Indian one. So that's how I started cooking. And then I would cook enchiladas. I cooked a lot of Mexican food as a tween, because that's when we moved to California. And it's also easy. Like I could open up a can of refried beans and shred some cheese and put some sauce over and put it in the oven. And then I would make a salad for my mom. And we just used bottle dressing then. So I could have dinner on the table for her, like that within an hour, by 6:30, because she came home at 6:30. And so I really just started dabbling in the kitchen like that.
Well, that's a good lead into the next question. With all of the different foods and ingredients you've cooked with in your life, why did you decide to focus the book on the tomato?
I think because I feel a tomato is very common in a lot of cuisines, South American cuisine, Asian cuisines, Middle Eastern cuisines, certainly Mediterranean. So I felt like everybody was familiar with the tomato. It was certainly ubiquitous in our home. As I said, my daughter, that was one of the first vegetables. Like we would give her little cherry or grape tomatoes as snacks to take to the park, but also she would start cutting them on her own, and she would mix them with things, and she started putting balsamic vinegar and things like that. So to me, a tomato is something that kids are really familiar with, and I thought at least people know about ketchup, right? So
And what is your favorite tomato and why?
It depends for what. I guess for making sauces and stuff, if I have access to them. San Marzano tomatoes, they're just particularly concentrated in flavor. They're really tart and sweet. They're great for sauces. It's hard to get them all the time, although canned ones are great. And if not, plum tomatoes for sauce, because they have less seeds. But for BLT, cold beefsteak tomato. I know you're not supposed to put tomatoes in the fridge, but I do sometimes.
So would that be your ultimate tomato bite? Like is it a cooked tomato sauce, or is it that sliced fresh tomato on a BLT?
In the summer, it's the fresh tomato on sourdough toast with lots of mayonnaise, sliced like a 1/4 inch thick beefsteak tomato that's been in the fridge, and then lots of sea salt on top of that, and crushed black pepper. I don't even need the bacon or the lettuce really, because then
That sounds delicious.
it is divine. It's a really nice snack. Just bread, tomato, mayonnaise, and salt and pepper.
All right, well, aside from tomatoes, do you have a favorite ingredient to cook with or a favorite cooking utensil in your kitchen?
Oh my gosh, so many. I love my microplane, and I never understood really the merits of the microplane. We all have graters, like box graters, which I do too. But then once I used it, first of all, it makes Parmesan look like and feel like snow, right? It's so fine. And it's really good to use with lemon zest. And even doing like a beautiful cacio e pepe, but adding lemon zest, finely grated with this thing that's like this big, doesn't take up that much room, is so divine and gives this beautiful floral citrus aroma to the cacio e pepe. So I would say a microplane is a great tool that many lay cooks may not know about, but a lot of people use them. You certainly get them everywhere. An ingredient I love to cook with, I put star anise in my chicken stock. I think it adds a really beautiful depth of flavor. It is one of the spices that they use in pho, for example, Vietnamese soup broth, right? I just love the depth of flavor it gives to the dish. I also use black garlic. I think my chicken stock always looks like beef stock, beef, because of the black garlic and the star anise. Those two things will give it such a dark, rich flavor with the lightness of chicken stock versus beef stock.
All sounds so good. We have another question from Francine in San Diego, and she asks, do you have any tips for making gourmet meals on a budget?
Yes, I do. The first thing you want to do is decide how much plant protein you can have and how much actual protein you have. You're going to spend the most amount of money on your proteins and some, like organic produce, right? Which gets pricey. If I think grains are a great way to go, like quinoa. I don't eat a lot of couscous because if I'm gonna have couscous, I might as well have pasta.
Feel the same way.
Yeah. And I mean, I love couscous when it's made beautifully, but the really tiny Moroccan couscous, not the Israeli couscous. So I genuinely would rather eat my calories in pasta, but or ramen, but all of those things, you have to just have a lot of uses for one thing. So like the chicken stock, you can make a roast chicken and you can have a fresh, beautiful roast chicken, half a chicken, if it's two of you, one night, and save whatever you don't use of everything. And then the other half, you take the meat out and you make yourself a chicken salad sandwich the next day, and you can bulk it up with a lot of vegetables and a lot of celery and stuff. And then save all the bones, save the fat, save everything. And all this time you've been saving your celery tops, your fennel tops, the heel of an onion, all that stuff in like a little bag, a muslin bag that you can keep in your crisper. I do this, and this is also what I put in my chicken stock, and it never comes out the same twice, and it's always delicious. And you're gonna make stock from those bones, a lot of stock, and then you're going to get ramen or some kind of dry noodles, and then you're going to use that to make ramen. There's a beautiful book by Tamar Adler, her name is, and called An Everlasting Meal. And she talks about it beautifully, and I highly recommend that book. It talks, and this is what I do in my house, and I think a lot of people who cook often do. It talks about just having one rolling meal. So you come home from the market, there's a sale on carrots. I mean, I'm making this up, but you can buy a lot, and then you can roast off all the carrots just with olive oil and salt and pepper and put them in your fridge. And then, you use a little bit here, a little bit there, take these leftovers. Like if I have roast vegetables, and it's like 1 tablespoon, I save them because then I just throw them into the stock. And again, that gives it this weird, funky, pan roasty flavor that you would have never gotten and you would never make just so you could have that. But since you have it, and the idea is about making every meal count. And when you make rice and things like that, I think eating well is harder on a budget, but I think eating well by staying home and spending half the money that you would when you go out is not as hard as people think.
That's
Does
such
that
good
make sense?
advice. Yeah, that's lots of good advice. Um, a little bit, oh, well, okay, Andrea from St. Louis has a question about the illustrator. She says, I've always loved the power of art to help tell a story, especially in children's books. How did you pick Juana, or was it the publisher? And what elements, attributes did you want to make sure were featured throughout the book? And P.S., she's an illustrator, so she says she pardon her biased question.
That's okay. We're happy to answer about that. Tamar and I had long conversations about what kind of books we were drawn to, what we remember as children, what are some of our favorites were. We showed each other that work. We shortened a list. And Juana actually was at the top of that list, I think, but she said no first because she was just too busy. Do you remember, Tamar?
Yeah, she was all booked up.
Yeah, and we understand that. We understand because we loved her work. We weren't surprised, but we just thought we'll aim for the top. And then, we're like, okay, let's regroup. And, we were going to contact, I think, a couple more people. We had a list, a short list, but we had a list. And then she came back like several weeks or a couple of months or something later and was like, hey, I think I can swing it. Did you guys find someone yet? And we're like, no, we did not. Please welcome. And I think she did a beautiful job. I gave her a file with a bunch of pictures, literally of my old apartment that I don't live in anymore, where the book takes place, and also the new apartment, as well as little videos of my daughter at that age, and just different family photographs. Also, Juana is Peruvian, and I'm not sure how familiar she was, with the nuances of different cultures within India. So we also just gave her some references for what a South Indian grandma would be dressed like, or what kind of jewelry is more prevalent in South India than North India, because India is such a vast country with so many subcultures in them. But when I say subculture, I mean where they speak a totally different language with a totally different root language, pray to a different god, wear a different dress, the whole shebang. So it's, I can understand how people may not know that if they're not, familiar, but I think Juana did a beautiful job of getting, the essence of all of that without, being too literal, but also more importantly of really understanding and living with the intimacy of this story. This is a very cozy, intimate story about one parent and one child and one relative who doesn't live with them. And so I love that it has that kind of very, in Italian, we would say accogliente, it has sort of very, it means like to kind of gather and, it has a very cozy feeling to it. And that's really what I wanted the most. And she nailed that, I will say.
Yeah, I think intimacy is the right word for it. You really feel like you're in the kitchen with these women together. And I love that certain elements from your own kitchen made their way into the pages of the book. I don't know if you would talk about your own Paati's portrait.
Oh, yes, sure. One of the things we also did was, yes, we gave her also little pictures of specific things. And there's a portrait in my kitchen that it has a black frame, and it's a portrait of my grandmother right when she got married. And it's black and white, and it's also on the cover of the last cookbook. I didn't even realize this until someone said, but I only reached for it so you can see the photograph.
I noticed that recently too, yeah.
So that photograph has hung in every kitchen of mine, including, one where this takes place, but also it was a good thing because I could give that to Juana, and in one of the spreads, you see that portrait in the background. And I think that kind of little touch is beautiful. There's also a little dancing doll that we have that I gave her pictures of, that's paper mache. And she totally got that too. And that's a very typical South Indian dancing doll. They're made of clay and paper mache. and they come in 3 parts, and they just kind of, dance one on hinges on each other. I can't find it now yet, but anyway, yes, it's by the portrait. So that's the little dancing doll that is, about 3 foot high. Krishna got it when she was 3, and that is the portrait of the grandmother that hangs in our kitchen as well. So I love those little touches, and also the flourishes of all the flowers. I think another thing that Juana got really beautifully is the movement, is the body language of these people, because that spread of them dancing to the rhythm of Amma's bangles, to me, is really joyful and wonderful. I love that one.
I think you said in an interview that you could identify what your mother or grandmother was cooking based on the sounds that the bracelets were making. And I loved that anecdote.
Definitely. Yeah, you knew, because if it was the coconut, it was one speed. And if it was chopping something like lotus root, especially, which is hard to cut through, it was another speed. So you knew exactly what was going on. And sometimes there'd be like 3 women doing 3 things, and they'd all have different speeds and different bangles. And you'd be like, okay, we're not ready to eat yet.
Well, our next question, this is, I guess, a good segue from Daniela in El Paso. What is your fondest childhood memory? That might be a tough one.
That is a tough one. I have so many.
Or maybe food specific?
Yeah, no, so many. I have one is that my grandmother didn't like a lot of mess ever, because she's a very practical woman, still doesn't, just turned 90 last week. And she would make a big bowl of rice and lentils or rice and yogurt. And there were like 4 or 5 of us grandchildren. We would all be asked to sit cross-legged with little bowls, like this big, like little tiny bowls. And we'd have to sit there like this. And she would come around, she would mix the rice and whatever with her hands, and she would give you a bite. She would either give it to you in your hand, or if you were not paying attention, she would plop it in your bowl. And then she kind of went one after the other like that. And then by the time she got to you, you had to finish eating and have your hand out. And it was just a way of being efficient and feeding kids in an assembly line. And all the stories that my grandmother told us that have stuck with me have been at mealtime. Like she told me the story of a myna bird who is so lazy, they lay their eggs in the nest of the crows because the eggs look the same. And we had a big tree outside our house with a big crow's nest. And they only knew once the babies hatched and they grew, and then they would fly away from the coop. And that was the story, or fly away from the nest, I guess. And then the crows would start again, but they were so dumb that they would do it all again. And then she would say, but they didn't do it because they were dumb. They did it because they loved the eggs, things like that.
Well, next we have Katie from Philadelphia, who asks, do you cook meals with your daughter as Neela does with her mom?
Yes, I certainly do. That is where the inspiration for Tomatoes for Neela came. It's so autobiographical, but I think it's something that I really believe everybody should grow up doing as a child. I think, being introduced to food along the way, all throughout your childhood, is a great way to build a life skill and the ability to feed oneself economically, healthily. It's also a beautiful thing to make beautiful meals, for your loved ones. And so it's a skill that every child should grow up with.
Are there favorite dishes that Krishna likes to make, or that the two of you make together?
I mean, Krishna and she loves pasta. And so that tomato sauce is our pasta sauce, basically. That's all we put in it. Sometimes I'll put some more crushed chili, but that's pretty much our pomodoro sauce. And we love to do that. She does love couscous because she just likes starch in all forms. Who doesn't? So she'll do a sriracha butter couscous but she'll like saute vegetables in butter, like celery, carrots, fennel, and then she'll just spice it up with sriracha and toss steamed couscous with it. She'll be upset because I'm giving you guys her recipe. But But she also makes a lot of sorbets. She doesn't cook with me as much as alongside me now because, she doesn't want to be told what to do and she wants to make her thing. And so I let her do that, but she's really good in the kitchen. I'm lucky.
Do you
Well,
have
I guess
any,
we've also been cultivating it, so there you go.
do you have tips for how to get kids more involved in the kitchen in general?
Yeah, it's never too early to start. I think, the earlier the better. And I think another way to get them excited about cooking is that when they're really small, you can even get them a play kitchen. I got one for Krishna. It was just all wood and it sat at the end of my counter. It was like $80 or something, but they're really cheap ones too. And you can give them play toys that will teach them how to cook, so just like they do anything else, like a fireman's hat or whatever, you give them that. And then eventually you let them handle things like vegetables and fruits that like they can break the ends off beans. When they get a little older, they can peel carrots or potatoes, they can sort things, they can wash things, like they're really good, little hands are really good at like separating parsley and just sitting doing busy work with their hands. It also is a way to keep them occupied. And so if you make them be involved in the food that they're going to eat, they'll be more likely to eat that food. And they'll be more likely to fall in love with fruits and vegetables if they've been playing with them and picking them out, and they're something that they did and built. And it's a great way to build confidence and teach them how to cook, but it's also a great way to get them to eat how you want to eat. And when people ask me how to get their kids to eat well, I always say, well, how well do you eat? And that's an important thing too. You have to just take joy in lots of fruits and vegetables, and after a while it becomes second nature and you get really into it. But the best advice I can give for anyone of any age who wants to eat better is to cook it themselves. Learn how to do that.
Well, Scott from Virginia Beach asks, I remember being a kid wanting strawberries and being told I had to wait until they were in season. Now it seems you can find them just about year round. How has this instant gratification changed the way we view food, and what effects will it have on us in the future? Kind of goes back to your pomegranate anecdote.
Yeah. I mean, listen, I live in the Northeast where from mid-November to almost April sometimes, it's pretty much just potatoes and root beers at the market. And so it is hard, which is why I like things like, freezing tomatoes or canned tomatoes or whatever. So if we're able to grow things in greenhouses or in vertical farming that is also, energy efficient, I'm okay with it. I think we just have to be responsible about it, because to your point, then, what does anything mean? I think those questions to me are more about what effect is it having on the environment. I mean, but I also believe that we should all be eating much more plant-based. I'm not a vegetarian by any means. I'm just saying how much I love the BLT, but I do think that it's much more harmonious with nature to get our protein and feed ourselves much more with plant-based food. And so from that point of view, it's not great anyway. So, one of the ways that you can tell if a soil is healthy or not is by how good that fruit tastes and how wonderful that vegetable is to cook with in season. And so I don't know enough about factory farming to say what the answer is. I think we just have to be careful of how much we manipulate Mother Nature in general. And so planting and eating with the seasons as much as that's possible, locally, and doing it in a kind way with pesticides too is the way to go. And also to make sure that everybody doing all that planting and picking and shipping is, compensated in a humane way.
Mm. Well, Christina from Frankfort, Kentucky asks, are there any more children's books in the works?
I hope so.
Me too.
Tamar and I are talking about them. I think I'm gonna finish this book tour. I'm gonna go film some shows. And I think we're gonna talk about it. I would love to do. I really had a great time. And I love having really this forum for shaping the way children look at food. And it's such a sweet, creative, lovely way to do it, you know, through this, through storytelling and through picture books. It's opened me up in a lot of ways, just in my thinking about what a book like this can be.
Has it affected the way you think about writing at all? Like when you're writing so many other things?
I haven't had time to process enough about that, but it's already got, I can tell you that it's already got me changing the way that I write recipes somewhat, because you know those recipes are really wordy in the back, even though they have very few ingredients and they're supposed to be for kids. Because my objective with that, as it is with anybody when I'm not standing with them in their kitchen, is to really teach them the principles of good cooking while I'm teaching you this recipe, like using this one particular recipe, which I want you to master and enjoy and, you know, like making all the time and not needing the recipe for. I want to teach you why you're doing something. That's why I like that one step, which, you know, could just say saute garlic on medium heat, is like, you know, 12 lines long, because I want to teach kids why and how to cook garlic properly, so that when they make a stir fry or a Thai curry or a ragu or any of these things, they'll know how to cook that garlic, because that's just a principle of good cooking. That has nothing to do with tastes.
Yeah, I mean, recipe writing seems really hard. And I love that you mentioned that with the garlic, because even as an adult, it has absolutely impacted how I approach working with fruits and vegetables in my own kitchen and thinking more about how I'm slicing them. And I shouldn't rush something. I should be slowly sauteing the garlic. So it's really, it's been really helpful, I think, for all ages, and especially, like you said, when you're teaching kids how to do some of these things for the first time, you do need to provide a lot of helpful instruction. The next question is from Crema in Atlanta, who asks, any additional thoughts on Gene Weingarten doubling down on his comments about Indian food?
Can't win them all. I mean, I think he issued that doubling down before I had published my op-ed in the Washington Post, which is what she's referring to. You know, I think he sincerely does. I haven't spoken to him, I don't know him, but I think he really sincerely does regret, you know, generalizing in the way he did. It just got under my skin because, you know, as a kid, I was made fun of for my lunch and bringing it to school. And so he's a humorist who's writing a column in the magazine in the weekend. And I'm sure he didn't think that much of it, but you know, like saying that all Indian food is done with one spice and that it seems like it was just a bunch of snails, like mashed and pureed. You know, it's just like, that is exactly the kind of taunt that a kid would make up, to be like, ew, what is that? That, you know, that looks gross. I mean, it wasn't funny, the column, and it wasn't true. So I didn't really see why there was a reason for it to exist, especially in a really prestigious paper like the Washington Post. So that's what my op-ed was about. And I think that he, you know, did correct it in some other forum, but I was too busy on book tour to check.
Well, your response was pretty incredible. So Tommy from Kissimmee, Florida says, as a child, my dream was to be a taste tester. I really love food. However, after discovering several food allergies, nuts, bananas, etc., I quickly learned it was not meant for me. My question is, are there any foods that you are allergic to? And if so, has this ever affected your ability to judge a dish?
I am so lucky that there's nothing that I'm allergic to food-wise. So I don't have that problem. When I was pregnant and filming Top Chef, we did try to be mindful not to have a raw fish challenge, or telling the contestant, our host is pregnant and she's one of your judges. We're not going to tell you what to cook, but if you choose to make a raw fish dish, it's probably not going to be something she's going to taste. But I don't think it ever happened. And I think I would, I had a fine time. I wasn't allergic. There have been times when contestants have overly spiced things or, things like that, that I've just not been well after. I got food poisoning once. It was horrible. In the finale. I won't say which season, but it was horrible. I wanted to die so bad. Like I just have never, it was with some seafood and, it's an occupational hazard, but I don't think I could do my job if I did have allergies like that. I'm so sorry you do.
Yeah, that's a good question. So Rich from Charleston, South Carolina says, curious to know if there are any recipes in this book. So curious, in fact, I just bought one. Well, that's a good opportunity to tell us about the delicious recipes in this book.
Sure. There are two recipes. One is for a very simple tomato sauce. It just has garlic and bay leaves in it, some salt and pepper. And it's supposed to be very basic, just to enhance the natural flavor of the tomato, so that you can either use it on its own, which it's delicious on pasta, or use it to make any dish you want, like pizza sauce, adding oregano, or then a base of ragu, or a base of chicken curry, or a base of chicken cacciatore would be great, or a Provençal stew. All of these things, anything tomato based. This is kind of mildly seasoned, beautifully cooked like tomato sauce, pomodoro. And then the other recipe is for tomato chutney, which is even more concentrated and is still a pretty simple, non-spicy chutney. It's sort of mildly spiced and you can control the spices. And that is more to use like a condiment, or to use it with cheese and crackers, or in place of salsa, or on a cheddar cheese, like a grilled cheese sandwich, or to dip it in. We've done all those things with it. It's also like, speaking of seafood, if you can get like really good sushi grade seafood at your, at your fishmonger or whatever, that tomato chutney, I just had it with just some very thinly sliced yellowtail and just a little dot of that chutney, and it's so good. And you get the spicy, yummy chutney that's really concentrated in this beautiful thin fish, and you think it's not going to work, but it's beautiful. So those are the two recipes. They're meant to be made with a parent, but they're also, done within half an hour after chopping. None of them require that much special equipment or skill. So I'm hoping that those are sort of starter tomato recipes for families. After reading the book a couple of times, maybe they'd like to try it. And so I'm very happy that we're now in tomato season. So I hope that, as we get further from the pub date, actually people will start making them and send me pictures, or how they, just a note about how they used it. I'd love to see those.
Yeah, that's a great idea.
By the way, if you go on my Instagram right now, I'm sure we put it on Twitter too and Facebook, but just very late last night, I put up the tomato chutney recipe. So if you want to make it along with me and you have the book, just get all the ingredients and chop them, and then watch the video with me, and you can just, pause and forward as needed. But that just went up.
We talked a little bit about the green market earlier, but Gianna from Nashville said, would you recommend shopping at a farmer's market over a traditional supermarket?
I think it's nice to support your local farmers. I think some things you can't get at a farmer's market. And I also think farmer's markets can be pricey for many people's budget. And so I think the lettuces or the beautiful particular fruits or vegetables in season. You could go take a whirl there and see what's there. And I think you should see what your budget allows. I think with a farmer's market, it's nice because eventually you develop a relationship with your purveyor. And so you can say like, hey, do you have this? Or do those sell out? And, they used to always be very generous with Krishna with giving her samples. If they, if I came early and I said I was gonna have a dinner party, in a few days, they would save me like some edible flowers that would go quickly. So it's a more direct relationship with the vegetables and fruits you're putting in your food for your family. But as I said, farmers markets are pricey, and they should be because they're compensated better, hopefully. And so I would just do a mix.
Well, that's a good lead in to talk about one of the wonderful bonuses in the book, which is all the learning that goes along with it. In addition to the story, which is this warm family story, there's also fun facts about tomatoes. There's information about farm workers and about activists like Cesar Chavez and Dolores Huerta. And so maybe you can talk a little bit more about why adding all this back matter was so important.
Sure. I mean, I love, general knowledge facts like that, not just about food, but about everything. I love Jeopardy. I'm good at Trivial Pursuit. And when I was young and I would read, I would remember weird facts like that in the middle of a story. Like I used to read Encyclopedia Brown, and I remember a food fact from that where, this woman was holding up a lobster and saying she was hypnotizing it, but she wasn't. It was red, and that's because it was dead and cooked. So I never forgot that. So now I knew why some lobsters were black and others, when you usually saw them on a plate, were red. And so I think kids have, they're such sponges when they're at this age range, and they can really just pick up things, and you never know when you can teach a kid or anybody something, so I love stuff like that. And so I wanted to add tomato facts. I also wanted to tell people where the tomato came from, and the history of it and all that. And then, to be honest, it was Juana's idea to add something about farm workers, which I thought was a fabulous idea. And so, we went and, I wrote up something, then we went through a few edits of that just to make sure also, we're working with a particular page space. And then we also wanted to give reference guides or, online sources for or books that, you could learn more about these issues if you wanted to. And I'm very proud of that page. I'm really happy that Juana wanted to do it. And so, I think it's very important, as I was saying before, to understand when things grow, why Mother Nature has a system, who's involved in all of that, tending to and picking and watering and shipping. Every time you can teach your child about things that are in their daily lives, like food, you make them more in touch with the world they live in. And I think that's all you can do as a parent. You can just arm them with information to make good decisions, but you have to, give it a little bit at a time, all the time.
Yeah, it's a really wonderful resource to have in the back of the book. And the book is just so gorgeous. Again, we want to let people know that signed books are available at premiercollectibles.com/Neela. And Padma, thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. It's been great to chat with you, to talk about food and family and tomatoes. And so for those of you who haven't gotten a signed copy yet, again, please tune into Premier Collectibles. And we want to thank everyone for joining us today.
Thank you so much for hosting me.
It was so much fun.
I know.
All right, good to see you, Padma, and thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
All right, bye-bye.
Hey, this is John Acuff, New York Times best-selling author of 7 books and someone who's done a live signing. If you like the one you just watched, make sure you check out our YouTube channel. It's full of amazing authors having great conversations and signing books for viewers just like you. So make sure you subscribe, and thanks for watching today.